How did I get the name Arsonist? So it went like this. I was in the studio with my boy OG Cuicide, and we was working on a couple of tracks. And every time I hit the play start on the MPC, it started to smoke. So I burned up 3 MP3s and MPCs in about 2 years. And by the third time, like Cuicide was like, man, you an arsonist. And I was like, whoa, like I should change my name to that, and it kind of stuck. So that's how I got the name of Arsonist. I burned up like 3 MPCs, and my homeboy Eric Jackson, he wouldn't even let me use his MP because he knew I burned them up. I'm from the Compton and Carson area. Literally my backyard is Compton and my front yard is Carson. My musical influence really came from the first time I heard Dope Man by NWA.
It was once said by a man who couldn't quit. Dope man, please, can I have another hit? The dope man said, "Clock, I don't give a shit if your girl kneel down and suck my dick."
I was like, I would say maybe 10 or 12 years old, and I was coming home from middle school. A friend's brother used to pick us up from school, and he had the NWA tape in the car. And the first time I ever heard Dope Man, it like clicked something in me. Like I wanted to be Dr. Dre. So that influenced me to start listening to more gangster rap as a kid. And I was never really concerned about the lyrical. It was always the beats. I always wanted to know, like, how did they make that beat? How do you do that? I basically had a brother. My big brother is really close with Yella from NWA. And I used to see him in the garage. He had a MPC drum machine, he had a little keyboard, and he would try to make beats. And I started to hear my own beats. So while I'm watching him do it, I'm thinking like, man, he should play this, he should do this. And I'm like a 12-year-old at the time. So we had the big brother, little brother dynamic where I couldn't touch his stuff. And it was like, man, get out of here, you don't know what you're doing. But I was hearing things from that time on as he was making his beats. So I was already plotting as a 12-year-old, like I need to get to some equipment so I can get my own out. My brother didn't have the keyboard skills that I had. I've been taking piano since I was 5 years old. So by the time I reached 12, I was already playing Mozart, classical music. I was playing in recitals and winning them by the time I was 12 years old. So I would hear keyboard parts and bass lines, and I'm like, man, this would be dope if it went there. And he's kind of like, man, get up out of here. You know, so he wasn't really checking for me until I really started doing it on my own. One day, this guy by the name of Benito walked into the Guitar Center, and he was a background singer for MC Hammer at the time. So he was trying to break away and do his own thing. So when he came in, I played him a beat. So he went and got the dude that was financing his situation to listen. So they started coming to the Guitar Center like every day, and they would slide me like 500. So what they did was they bought the keyboard that I was using. Then I would slide them a disc with the track laid out on it, and they would take it, put it in, and the track would play in their studio, and they would pay me 500. So I ended up getting caught doing that, so I got fired. So you know, the hell with y'all Guitar Center, but I ended up getting fired for doing that. So when I left Guitar Center, like I knew the whole time when I was doing my thing that way, my brother was running with NWA. He was really close with Yella. So I used to always like beg him, like, dude, let me just roll with you up to Audio Achievements, the studio in Torrance where NWA recorded. And you know, I was like too young to be really hanging out with them, and he was like, nah, man, this, you know, these dudes is out your league. So one day he decides to take me up there. So he takes me to Audio Achievements, and I'm like, I'm finna shoot my shot as soon as I get in here. Like, I might not ever get in here again. So I get into audio, I meet Donovan the Dirt Biker, who is the owner of the studio, and I play him some beats. And he's like, yo, like, these is really good, but the sonics ain't right. He was like, they need to be mixed better, this and that, and I'll teach you. And he was like, can you get up here? I was like, I don't have a car. So he was like, you know what, I'll come pick you up. He was like, I'll come pick you up and I'll take you back home. So he used to have me in the studio at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning because he would be asleep He'll be sleeping in the lounge, and I'll be in there learning how to do beats using the equipment he had there. So he told me one day, he was like, man, you can be the next Dr. Dre. And you know, I work with Dre every day, so I see it in you. So that really pumped my head up. So that's when I realized that, okay, I can be a professional at this, and I'm ready to take this to the next level. My first established artist was Benito, because I had that relationship with him from Guitar Center, and he used to be signed to Fully Loaded Records. Fully Loaded Records was a subsidiary of BET at the time. So it was like BET Records, and Ernie Singleton was the CEO. I was, I believe, 18 years old. I had, Benito came to the studio where I was working out of, I did a beat for him on the spot. He took it back to Ernie Singleton. Ernie Singleton was like, actually Benito's album was done at the time, but when I did that track, Ernie Singleton was like, man, that track gotta go on the album. So that was my first placement. Like, they shot me $7,500 and I blew it in like 3 days. I was buying the homies rims and taking everybody out to eat. I thought that money was gonna keep coming. So that was my first real placement. After the Benito record, what I ended up doing was, you know, it was during the era of when NWA, I mean not NWA, but Death Row was really starting to pop, and Bad Boys. So everybody started to have wanted to have these click record labels, like we're the such and such, or we're the such and such, and they wanted an in-house producer. So I started clicking up with different people, and I ended up running into these guys from Main Street Mafia. And that was Big Jess, Big Droop, Fred, and Ed. And OG Cuicide is the one who put me into it with them, because he had signed a deal with them, and they didn't, at the time, I think Rhythm D was their in-house producer. And they had some type of falling out with Rhythm D, and he left, so they needed somebody to come make beats ASAP. So Cuicide's like my big brother, so he brought me in and was like, man, I need to do these beats. And I wasn't even ready, but I was like, man, I'm here with these gangsters, I'm about to get it popping. So I ended up signing up with them, and then from then on, I did Cuicide's whole first album on that label. And then we brought in Qsta, which is my boy Q, brought him in, and I did his first full album. And on that album we had, between Cuicide album and Q's album, we had King T, B.G Knockout and Dresta, we had Gangster from the Comrades, we had Big Psych, we had so many like West Coast dudes come through there and do records with us. So that's when I really started to become like a full-fledged, I'm doing everybody's album. And I was probably like 19 or 20. My expansion from gangster rap into R&B happened when I met this cat named Doc. I met him, he came to my studio. I was working with an artist that he was managing in Butterfly, and we linked up, and so she was doing R&B. And what he used to do is just let me hear different records that I could like vibe to, that get me in the mind frame of what I need to do. Because the way that I work is like, if you tell me, look, I need country music, I'll listen to country music for 2 weeks straight until I get myself in that mind frame of what I need to do. So switching over into R&B wasn't as hard because I had been classically trained in piano. So all I needed to do was figure out what the chord structure was, how R&B songs are laid out by verse and B section and hook and bridge, and then I was able to put it together. And so that's how I really started doing R&B, is, you know, when I met Doc, because this cat had me doing all kind of stuff. Different artists that have gotten down on my tracks. Let me see. Start with Snoop Dogg, Dub C, B.G Knockout, Dresta, King T, RBX, Marques Houston, Bell Biv DeVoe, Murs, Ralph Tresvant. That's all I can think of off the top hand of my major known cats. My highlight is gonna be BBD, because those are like idols for me when it comes to music. Like, it's somebody I looked up to as a kid. I used to use their lyrics to write letters to girls. You know, that was my type, you know, somebody that I looked up to. So BBD is gonna be first and foremost. But I always go back and give props to OG Cuicide, B.G Knockout, and Dresta, because at the time B.G Knockout and Dresta was just getting off Def Jam. And when they met me, I was a nobody. They immediately like gave me this type of confidence, like, bro, you can do what everybody else is doing. We need you to do our track. So they gave me a lot of confidence too. But working with BBD is the top, you know, because I actually got to sit in the studio on multiple occasions and work with them. Right now, a lot of the times you just send a cat a track and the song come back done. But sitting in the room and watching these legends work, because they still work the way legends work. Like hand in hand with the producer, sitting there watching them do that was just like the highlight of my career. 3 artists that I would like to work with, dead or alive, would be number 1, Michael Jackson. Number 2, Anderson .Paak. I love Anderson .Paak. Cat is super dope. And number 3, you know, from R&B, I would have to say Brandy. I would love to get in the studio with Brandy. Brandy is a beast. TV shows that you can find my music on is pretty much anything on MTV, from Run's House to Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I've done Love and Hip Hop, America's Top Model, Tia and Tamera. Probably at least 30 to 40 TV shows is where you can hear my music. My top producers that I've been influenced by is, I have my West Coast Mount Rushmore, and then I have my guys that I listen to from the East Coast. Because growing up, my brother was a DJ, so he played music from everywhere. So I wasn't, even though I gravitated towards West Coast music, I had a well-rounded appreciation for music from the East Coast and other different places. So Dr. Dre is always number 1. DJ Quick on the West Coast. Battle Cat is one of my favorites on the West. And then when I switch over to the East Coast, I would have Pete Rock is one of my favorites. Like, that dude kills a sample. Of course, DJ Premier is one of my favorites. And then outside of the coastal thing, you know, you're looking at Timberland. Even though Timberland was doing his thing when I was really starting to do music, but Timberland is an animal, changed music. And then of course you got Quincy Jones and Teddy Riley. Those are like the godfathers of the game. So those guys really influenced my music. I had the opportunity to work for Jackie Jackson for a couple months for his record label that was called Jesco Records. So I was brought in, my man Doc had set up a situation where I came in, became an engineer for Stevie J. You know, everybody knows Stevie J from the reality shows that's on right now. So I was his engineer for a while. And I would say Jackie is like, between BBD, Jackie was one of the first people I've ever been around that I was literally starstruck. Like, I'm really not that type of dude to get starstruck, but when I met Jackie, it was just kind of like, wow. And then they have that soft Jackson voice, and that just, you know, it takes you back to a place of your childhood of listening to them sing ABC, and to actually be sitting there meeting him and realizing he was one of the coolest dudes you could ever meet. So I remember the first day I met Jackie. I don't know if it's from the loud music, but I suffer from migraines. So I remember the first day I met Jackie, I had a migraine. So Jackie went out in the backyard of the house we were renting, where the studio was, and he was like, I'm gonna have you do some yoga exercises and some breathing techniques to help you get over your migraine. So I'm sitting here like, Jackie Jackson got me in the backyard of a house. This Michael Jackson brother, like, I'm in the backyard with Jackie Jackson, and he's trying to help me get over my migraine. And like, he was such a cool dude, and I got a chance to work with his son, Dills, Ziggy, produced a record for him called Update Your Clock, I think that was the name of it. I did a record for him, and while working there, I met all kind of people was coming through the studio. Dalvin from Jodeci came through a couple times. Also, Khloe Kardashian, you know, from the famed Kardashian family, she was like our intern. Yeah, one of the lasting lessons that I learned from working with legends like BBD was one night we were in the studio mixing a record called I Ain't Going Nowhere. We all thought the record was done, but it was just something about the record that just was lacking. And it was about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. Ricky Bell just basically grabbed a stool, pulled up to the mic, and was like, "I'm doing the whole song over." Now, mind you, we weren't in a session that was there to be tracking a new song. We were supposed to be mixing the record. The record was already done. So to see Rick have that type of work ethic and say like, you know, the song ain't going out until I'm comfortable with it, and to sit there at 3 o'clock in the morning and do a whole song over. Now, R&B songs take time to do. And I remember everybody in the studio being asleep, except for me, Rick, and the engineer. And he knocked it out. And I gained so much respect for him as a legend. I said, this is the kind of work ethic you gotta have if you wanna make it.